When I grew up in Reading, my family was well known, not wealthy, but prominent. And wherever I went, Reading was a small town, 12,000 people was my earliest memories. And I had a great upbringing. We ran all over town, all hours of the day and night. But everybody knew who I was. If they didn't know my name, they knew how to contact my mother. So I had to stay pretty good. But they were all friendly and they looked after me. And they showed me the places, things to do, places to go, the beautiful spots, and helped me stay out of trouble. When I saw the Mien here, I wanted to show them the way I was raised. People be friendly. If you're strangers, you share it. You show off a little bit. And wow, who are you? And what are you doing here? And let me show you this. And this is Reading's a great place. And so I was in the right place at the right time. I had my credential. I was teaching English, basic skills, having fun, laughing, and no pressure. If you make kids comfortable, if you eliminate some of the fear and the problems, fear of making a mistake, they grow fast. And they did. I went to school in Reading, elementary school, Sequoia, Shasta, graduated from Shasta, went to Shasta College, and then right to Chico and graduated with a bachelor's degree in international relations. And I always, like all young people, I wanted to travel the world. The opportunities never came up. I wanted to experience international culture, but I couldn't afford it, or nothing was happening. I ended up getting a teaching credential. I fooled around with different departments and majors in graduate school, and not very successful, but I got a teaching credential through San Jose, and then finished it at Chico. And when I moved back to Reading to teach history, because I had a history credential, and I noticed that some new people had moved into Reading, all the refugee population. So this would be, my wife and I were married in Reading in 1984, and I didn't know it at the time, but this is the time the Mien were coming here. And I had a job in Monterey, Pebble Beach, taking care of a mansion, and I went to school first for most of my credential, and then we decided to move back to finish it up at Chico. And back in Reading in about 1986. So several Mien families had moved in at that time, but I was still not unaware of them. And I was substitute teaching, and I was the principal of one of the high schools I was also attending bar. The principal and superintendent were in the bar one night saying that they were having problems, that all the Southeast Asian refugee families were moving in, and they didn't know what to do. They were beside themselves. It was a scary thing. You guys have no idea how much you terrified the Reading population. All 235 families of you. But it was different, and Reading's not so much racist as they were bigoted. They didn't like change. What are they doing here? Why are they here? And then they don't have time to find out. So I asked the principal and superintendent, I said, what's going on? They said, we don't know what to do. And I'd done some volunteer work teaching English second language in Monterey. And I loved it. And I knew some of the equipment, the language master and stuff. And I said, I know what to do. Hire me. So 2 years at Nova High School as a paraprofessional, but Virgil Smith was the director of the program, and he just turned me loose. And I'd go up to the room with, I had my first class, Nyon and Joon, and Naifo, I think, was there. Kaofo was there. Kaofo was the oldest brother. There were a few Lao kids, Kam Sing, then her sister Kam Ving, and so I was at 3 years at Nova, and then I think one at Shasta. Then I came over to Enterprise after that. By 1989, 1990, I was at Shasta. But Nova was a blast. We'd play games. it was just building communication skills. At Nova, I remember walking down the halls and seeing one of the kids, I think it was Luang, and he was standing there looking suspicious. And San's a pretty nice kid. And I walked over to him and said, "What are you doing?" And he was very nervous. And I think he had a knife. And he had been being harassed, intimidated, threatened by American kids. And I think he was waiting for someone to come into the room and smart off to him. And I said, it scared me because I didn't know what to do. I said, "A knife? Ugh. What do I do now?" We were supposed to automatically report these things. But San was not a bad kid. He was scared. It was frightening. I said, "Put it away. Don't ever bring it back again." And then he went into law enforcement. I don't know if he ended up there, but I don't think so. But he did very well, very smart. So after 2 years of being a paraprofessional, it was just playing games with a handful of kids. Feuy, I think, they lived down on Locust, and his sister, Luang, I think was her name, Luang Feuy. And anyway, the principal, I did 2 years as a paraprofessional, I did 1 year, and I said, "I need a teaching job." And he said, "I can't afford one right now. If you do 1 more year as a paraprofessional, I will hire you as a teacher on your 3rd year." And I said, that's all I needed. With a my wife and I had bought a house, and we wanted to start a family, and I wanted medical benefits, and that's the paraprofessional job. The pay wasn't that great, but I tended bar at nights and had enough. My wife worked, and so with the benefits, and we decided to start our family. Alex was born in 1990. And then the 3rd year, I got my teaching credential, and then I had my own classroom. I think I was at Shasta that year. There were some Amerasian kids at Shasta at that time. I remember telling them at Shasta, I said, "What are you going to do?" They said, "What are you going to do next year?" I said, I'm going to move. I'm going to go out to Enterprise." This is Barbara Hubner taught with me. Barbara was absolutely wonderful. And her daughter didn't teach, but we had connections. She went out to Central Valley. And I said, "I'm going to go out to Enterprise because this is where the population's moving. They're moving the apartments on Hilltop, the notorious apartments on Hilltop." And but also something that happened in that 2nd or 3rd years, we interviewed paraprofessional from the Mien community, and it was put me in I had a dilemma because it was a husband and wife. It was Wern and Feuy Seng, and I would have liked to have hired both of them, and I hired Feuy because she was a talker. And my experience with Feuy is when she would interpret for us, if the person she was interpreting for, if he spoke 1 or 2 sentences, we'd ask Feuy what he said, and she'd go on and on for 5 or 10 minutes, on, and way more than what the person said. And then the opposite of Wern Lee, if the guy spoke for 5 minutes, and we'd say, "What did he say?" And he'd say, "Yes." And I needed a talker at the moment. Wern has been a rock at Enterprise High, and I couldn't operate without him. But we hired Feuy, and I don't know, I forget how many years she worked with us before getting her other job, and then Luang came on board. Anyway, about the 4th year, I think I went to Enterprise High, and that was great. But that's when the kids were starting to get a little sure of themselves too, becoming American teenagers. Smart. We had a few Cambodian kids in those times. Hang Seng. There were several about 35 families, Cambodian families. They all disappeared. The rumor was that they had one of the mothers had committed suicide, and that cursed the whole that whole apartment complex was no good anymore. And so they packed up and left. And a lot of the old material I have, the teaching material, is for Cambodians, and I don't have any. There was another kid named, last name was Pot, P-O-T, Seng. He was a nice young man too. I don't remember. Over at Enterprise, I had a girl that was half Cambodian, half Lao, and that was that. I know one of the humorous stories in my mind. My supervisor was very much involved at the beginning. He took over the program, and the Salinthone family was there. It was Pon and Nok and Ni, lots of Dani, lots of Nok, 2 girls, and then Pon. And Pon was a character. I liked them all. Their family was good, but Mr. Salinthone was kind of a scary guy. He was very strict, and he was military, Royal Lao Army. And I don't know was it an officer, but he had seen war, and I think he was a low-grade officer. But I remember one time in the supervisor's office, and his kids were coming to school irregularly, and it made the administration mad. And Mr. Salinthone was cool. He had seen death. I'm certain he had killed many people, tortured perhaps, but he had a mole on his neck, and it had 3 or 4 long hairs. And my supervisor is threatening to take his food stamps away if his kids don't come to school. And I know the kids wanted to come to school. I don't know what was going on, why they were irregular, but it wasn't because they didn't want to. They wanted to come to school. And so Mr. Salto's stroking the hairs on this mole, and my supervisor saying, and if you don't bring your kids to school, we're going to take your food stamps away. Telling this to a man who has killed people, in all likelihood, who has tortured people, perhaps been tortured himself, and and I'm watching him going, if this were Laos, you'd be a dead man. He wasn't intimidated at all. A typical American power trip, trying to trick them or fool them or something. The girls did well. I don't know. I suspect Pon graduated. They left after not too long. Pon was a tough kid himself, and I remember it was one of the first fights. When you ask for like oh no moments, what were those oh no? Fights were always an oh no. And I was walking over by the gym, by the locker room, and I saw the crowd of boys. It was a fight. It was a feeding frenzy. They're all gathered around for a fight. And as soon as I got up there to look at what was going on, Pon had pulled off his shirt. My first thought was one of the kids, Pon was going to get beat up. I'd say, oh no, he's going to get crap beat out of him by a bunch of white kids. Well, Pon was tearing off his shirt, taking all comers. Come on, if you want a piece of me. And rather than the weak kid that I thought he might be, he was lean, and he was raised in a culture that created kickboxing. He knew how to fight. Yeah. And he had already dispatched the first kid, and 2 other guys, and all the kids were starting to get scared, but a couple said, "Hey, you can't do that." But once I saw that he was not getting once I thought he was doing okay, I slowed down. Because they needed to establish themselves. I'd never approved of fighting, but I slowed. And I can't remember whether I think I just said, break it up, that's enough, stop here. But he had already knocked one kid down. I didn't see it was so fast. And he was ready to, come on, any and all of you, I'm here. And all the kids said, oh, they have gangs of Asians. Well, the gang is all the white, when you're surrounded, there are 100 white kids there, and there are 3 or 4 gang of Asians. Intimidating. Yeah. As I told Michelle, you guys, or maybe I said earlier on this, you guys terrified a lot of Readingites who lived a pretty sedate, no outsiders. A few Mexicans growing up. I played with the Mexican kids early on. They were the most exciting thing going. This is another reason why I got involved in this. I know what it's like to be an American teenager growing up in Reading. I was one. But I didn't know what it was like to go into a Mexican household or an Asian house, Mien household, or Lao, or Vietnamese. This was different. And it allows me to understand my own culture better. if I asked people to describe your culture, most people would have a hard time unless you have something to compare it against. And it makes, you know, I get thanked a lot for the things I did, but the Mien community and the Lao and the refugee, the I-94 community is what I call them. That's the Hmong, Mien, Cambodian, the Vietnamese, and the Lao. They created an opportunity for me that is indescribably wonderful. I don't think I would have lasted as a history teacher. I love history, but teaching history and loving it are two different things. And I don't think I would have survived. But teaching, getting involved with the kids, making them comfortable, and immediately talking to their families and parents. You know, there were so many things going on in the home. You could tell the kids they're not learning because there's controversy at home. What do we do now? The police are doing this, saying this. You're getting junk mail sometimes. Get a piece of junk mail and you think, and it says very important, and they spin in over it. And when it's just throw it out, away. No. So it's a no-brainer. There were a lot of people in Reading that helped, but I was in a key position as the educator. I was automatically given respect. It was mine to lose, but it was given to me automatically, and and it was the right thing to do. Sometimes in our lives, doing the right thing is difficult, but this was never difficult. This was something that had to be done. It's a no-brainer. You do the right thing, and I never once looked back. I never once was ashamed. I lost a few friends. You know, what are you doing, Trent? Working with those, whatever. And I said, it's great. You know, this is our classic American immigration story. They fled poverty, war, persecution, and they know what it's like to have their rights deprived. And they come to a new country and want to establish a new life for themselves. And they don't speak English. They don't share the same religion, but they're good, solid family structure. And their lives are intertwined. The religion that they practice and the work that they used to do, and they're out of their element. And Reading, I joke that, why are they here in Reading? I joke that one of them had a flat tire between Long Beach was a port of entry, Oakland, and Seattle, and Portland perhaps. And one of them driving between the two places had a flat tire and looked around. And me and our Highlanders, not city dwellers, you know, we sent some of them to Anchorage, for crying out loud. So you couldn't pick a more opposite place than what they're used to. And they had a flat tire. So one of them stopped here, maybe Longfeen, and liked the remotely looked like their homes in Laos, where they could hunt and fish. And boy, all the rumors among the white mainstream community of they get free fishing licenses, they're getting this and getting that. And I had some friends that I knew that were saying they have no limits, or they're poaching or doing this. And those same friends had poached all their lives, Friends and I, you know, we have great stories of the fishing game chasing us, throwing salmon out of the back so we don't get caught with them. Not me personally, but I poached a few salmon, pitchfork in the creeks, and trout. But the Mien liked it, and they've been a great addition to Reading. It's brought, you know, my degree is international relations, wanting to teach, but coming back to Reading, Reading's not exactly the international cultural center of the Western Hemisphere, so the two didn't jive. What happened, fortunately for me, is the international community came to Reading. It opened my eyes, and my parents supported me. My mom cautioned me once in a while. She said, "Do you know what you're doing?" I had teachers caution me, said, "Do you know what you're doing here?" And I said, "God, just make them comfortable. Make them take away their problems, and they'll learn in your classes. But if they've got problems going on, if there's police threatening to arrest them, or neighbors having a fit, they're not listening to anything you're saying in the classroom. You can talk geometry from here to kingdom come, and they're worried about their safety. Anything to do with guns was an oh no. There's still, some of the girls were getting married pretty young, and if I could go back in time, I would assert myself a little more. I had to stay out of personal business. I couldn't get involved in that. But I went to a couple weddings. Girls were 14 years old, and in the highlands of Laos, not such an uncommon deal. But and they were parents agreed upon that. But I don't know if I think the girls were pretty terrified. Maybe the boys terrified too, to be married so young. Some of those marriages worked out, some didn't. But those changed. I knew if I backed off, not upset family structure, that those would change. They would look around and say, hey, I'm not getting married at 14, 15, 16 in enough time. And then eventually you had to break the barrier of sending the girls to college and university. That was a barrier to break too. And girls get scholarships to go to UC, Riverside, and the parents didn't want, the father didn't want her to, and you need to get married and raise a family. And what are you talking about? College. And even some of the boys, the rumor was going around, don't marry a girl with a good education, because she won't make a good wife. That solves itself. You always want a wife smart and do the right thing. Some of the girls were pregnant at school, and I know one of my favorite moments was I knew the young lady was pregnant, and she wasn't feeling too good. I didn't know when the due date was. She came up to me in class and said, I think I need to go home. I'm not feeling too good. And I said, by all means, go home. And I got a call that night. And she said, Mr. Copland, it's me, Coy. And I said, well, where are you? And she said, I'm in the hospital. It was about 9:30. She said, I just had a baby. And she said, I want to tell you I'm not going to be in school tomorrow. And that was a Wednesday night, because she said she wasn't going to be in school Thursday. I said, okay, Coy, take Friday off too. You know, no American kid would ever do that. It's never happened to be concerned about school when you just had a baby. She was very proud of herself, and I was proud of her too. I had another girl throw up in class from morning sickness. I knew she was pregnant. She had a husband. They're still married now. And the kids started to flip out. I just grabbed a towel, wiped it up. It's okay. No problem. No problem. Just let's go on. The boys started, as they became more American teenagers, and more sure of themselves. There was some gang trouble for a long time through the 90s, but they learned. They didn't see many veteran gangsters doing very well. When I left for China in 95, I believe, I could be wrong on my statistics, but there were 63 beds in juvenile hall, and I think 20 of them were Southeast Asian kids. The police had done a big roundup to send a message, and when I came back from China, I was there for a month, it was down to 3, and then in no time at all it was none. So something happened with the work the police were doing and the parents, and the kids made a decision themselves that the gang thing wasn't where it's at, and that they needed to go to college and stop playing around. There was a shooting, I know, and a lot of it coming from out of town, coming up from Sacramento, that I-5 corridor. Any kid that comes from out of town doesn't care what happens up here. He can cause all the trouble he wants. But there was a kid shot, and I believe killed, a Vietnamese boy on Hilltop. And I think that was over the little eating cat insults. And that was irritating. I can't tell you how many times I had to battle that rumor. Lies. It's just malicious. just trying to stir up stuff. And the RPD started having the regular monthly meetings. Chuck Byer did a great job, and the chief Blankenship did a great job. They had community outreach. Fish and Game was interested in helping. I found out, I'd heard some crazy stories from the hunters, Mien, Southeast, mostly Mien. I don't know any of the others that hunted. And they were saying some pretty bad stories about Fish and Game officers and what they were doing. And I read some time later that there was a guy in jail and he got bit by a bat. He had a bat in his pocket. And he was in jail for impersonating a Fish and Game officer. And what he was doing, he had a pickup truck, a green truck. He'd take a red light, put it on the top, come into hunters' camps, and confiscate their rifles and other things, and shake them down and pretend to be a big shot. And he was a complete imposter. I don't know of anyone that directly encountered him, or if that's the case, but it sure would solve a lot of. When I hear the Fish and Game side of the story, and I hear the Southeast Asian side of the story, the two don't match at all. So maybe that guy could have caused some of the problems. There were some other issues. I had to take a father down and have him booked in the jail. And that's probably one of the hardest things I ever had to do. It was like I was taking my own dad. They wouldn't let, he didn't stay in the jail, but he had to be booked and photographed, and they wouldn't let me in. Dad was scared. He didn't do anything that I believe was worth being arrested. And the officer, the sheriff's deputy, was out of line, and the sheriff is pretty upset with me. We went to a meeting. I took a student along with me for a senior project. He was one of the Hmong boys, two tower, one of the Muas maybe, and the sheriff threw us out. It was a sheriff. We filed a complaint against the officer deputy, and when we showed up at the meeting, someone went back and said, the guy who's filed the complaint. I wasn't filing the complaint. I was helping the father to file the complaint. And he came in and he threw us out. I was scared. I said, God, this is really backwoods. He later apologized and said he'd had a rough day and wanted to do the right thing. And I think in the end, he didn't do any more harm. I don't think he did any good. But the RPD was much better prepared than, or handled things much better than the sheriff's office did at the time. Chris Thompson was a sheriff's deputy at the time. I loved him. He was great. He was my go-to person, the only one I had for a while. A kid came up, Porterville maybe, and a little tiny. He was probably one of the smallest Mien boys I'd ever seen, and he was bragging he was a big gangster, a Blood or a Crip. And Chris Thompson was huge, and he had tattoos and hairy, and I don't know how big he's big, much bigger than me. And he sat the little kid down. He says, "So you're a big gangster, huh?" He says, "Show me your tats." And the kid, "I don't have any tattoos." He says, "No tats." He says, "You're not a gangster." You know, it scared the crap out of the kid. I think one of the saddest moments where I felt tragic, where I felt just terribly sad for one of my students, it was she was one of the later income kids to come, and I asked them to write an essay about camping, and she had spent, I think, between 7 and 10 years in the refugee camps. And she said, "Camping." I said, "Yeah, you know, like you're at Bernie Falls, your family loads up the car and you take sleeping bags." They had done that, but it was their life. It wasn't like a fun thing.
Yeah.
And she had spent most of her life in the refugee camps, and very closed and sheltered and limited. She's doing very, very well, by the way, now. She has an excellent job in the area. Through Seacom showed up about that time, and I was warned away from them. You know, they're proselytizing and this and that, and it was not true at all. Barbara Grosh and then Dorothy Jordan was just, God, I miss her. She was a wonderful woman. and they weren't selling Christianity other than just being themselves. And they started helping the refugees process paperwork. I took a van load. The district office was very generous with my time. If I felt I needed to go somewhere, they said, go, take care of business. So I took a school van, I think, down to Sacramento. It was sometime around Christmas time, Christmas vacation perhaps, and helped a father get paperwork, and several kids renew their green cards, I think. Some of them were starting to expire. And that was a line. The line went around the block it was forever. We didn't get in. We got there at 7 in the morning. We didn't get to talk with anyone till about almost 4, about closing time, 3:30 in the afternoon. And they wouldn't let me in to interpret for the father. And that's always funny. I got called to interpret all the time, but I don't speak Mien. But I knew what they were saying. You know, it's the body language communication. And the father's, in this case, the father's fingerprints, they said had to be within the last 6 months, or their prints expired, as if that's possible, and it's not. And the father's fingerprint records were like 2 days past 6 months. And so the first question out of his mind, to the immigration officer was, do I need to get new fingerprints again? And that was at a different building, not even a different place. And the guy says, yes, you have to get new ones. So that's all. We waited all day in cold morning rain. The line was about 5 wide and stretched down the block and down that next block. I wanted to go apologize to everybody there.
Wow.
They were rude. They're not. I guess that's part of their training. Don't smile, or don't be friendly, or don't do this or that. Maybe there were some friendly ones. But Seacom got involved, and Dorothy Jordan was just fabulous. Don Jordan, and I've worked close. I was on their board of directors because I had my connections with the school. I got invited to funerals, the Guadong ceremonies. I went to Wern Lee's Guadong ceremony at his house. That was mind blowing for me to see what was taking place. All the ceremonies and the paintings and the art, and putting on the women's clothes, and Long Fien and all the other men who supported them. I took some of those men. Did you go on the trip to Weaverville to the Joss house?
No.
So let's see. I think that might have been Wang Fien on that one, or Wern Chiem's daughter, maybe Annie. And anyway, I took about 5 fathers to the Joss house, and that's a Taoist temple in Weaverville. And that's very interesting because the Taoist that came to that's built that temple came from southern China, the same area where the Mien were. And at the same time they were coming to the United States, the Chinese coming for the gold country, the Mien were leaving because conditions must have been really bad. So the Mien took their Taoist practices into Southeast Asia, into Laos. The Chinese brought the Taoism to the Joss house. So then when the Mien fathers came to Reading, and I took them to the Joss house, they knew it was Taoism as practiced 150 years ago.
Wow.
The Taoist priests that come from San Francisco, it's not so recognizable because it's changed over the years. But the Taoism that Long Fien preached was almost identical to what the miners taught in the 1850s and 60s. They knew everything. They started, wow, look at this, look at this. And there was an eye-opener for them, but really delightful for me. The elderly, I believe, suffered more than the kids. The kids had a hard time, but the elderly, they were really lost. And then the adults, that if all things were normal, they'd be productive adults, leaders in their community. In the highlands of Laos, you put them in Reading, and they have no worth. They have no job. The kids got jobs. The kids could drive. The youth, America praises youth. If you're old and speak Mien and know a lot about Taoism, and can't drive a car and can't get a job, you've gone from the top of the pyramid to the very bottom overnight. And we learned that pretty fast, or I did. I saw it right in front of me. I was knocked on the door one time, and there were some problems. I was very eager to get out into the households because the people were so friendly, inviting me in. They knew I cared, and I knew I wouldn't give up. And I knocked on the door to ask about a student who wasn't coming to school, and the grandfather opened the door, and he had a little girl, little kindergartner, first grader, holding onto his leg. And I started to speak with him, but he didn't speak English. I could tell he didn't understand it. And then I looked down, and she said, "Grandpa doesn't understand," or something like that. And I said, "Well, you tell your grandpa." And when I leaned down to her to point to her, "You tell your grandpa," I almost right in front of my eyes saw this relationship go like this. Grandpa became the child, and the little first grade became the adult.
Yeah.
And I knew, I said, "Oh, wow." I said, "That's a bad deal. We'll do things different from then on." We had situations where it was Pham Se Chow, elderly father. She'd been in trouble with various things. She had a child from Sancho salmon.
Oh, Pham Se Lor.
Pham Se Lor. She was energetic and pretty smart, and she said something that amazed me. And I said, "What's your dad say about that?" She said, "Mr. Copland," she says, real sassy. She said, "Mr. Copland, I don't speak Mien, and my father doesn't speak English." And that was an eye opener. You're living under the same roof, you know. I live with teenagers, and sometimes I think they're speaking a different language than I am. But in this case, it really was. And I don't think she did speak Mien. And if she did, if she interpreted for her father, I'm certain it wasn't always the truth. And you kids all lied to your parents, tell you this is okay. This is what all Americans stay out all night and don't have to do homework. And in a lot of cases, it's true. A lot of American students don't do their homework, and they do stay out all night. But you're following the bad examples. Going on to the university was a wonderful thing for the kids. Graduation was wonderful. I had one, Cheng Kwan was 23. You know, that's a no-no in high school anymore. Once you're 18, you're on a fine line if you're not graduating at 18. But I think Cheng Kwan was 23. I think Nyon was older. But they let me make the decision. Mike Stewart was fabulous. Scott Hepburn at Enterprise was great. Mike Stewart really was a dynamic. I couldn't thank him enough. You know, he was so supportive. When you go into his office and say, what can I do for you? What's the problem? And I tell him the problem, and he says, "Well, you're the professional. What do you need?" And then he'd start offering. He says, "I can do this for you, this for you, this for you." Most administrators I have a string of great administrators. Only a few would say, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. And they'd put roadblocks right away, other than, as opposed to Mike Stewart saying, "You're the professional. Do what you're training." And I did. I took trips to San Francisco without permission. Those were risky. Were you on the trip where we got lost, or we lost there was another car of kids following us?
No.
I think it was one of the earlier ones, because we made a wrong turn and we had to follow each other to know where to go. No, it was one of the later ones, but we had no way of. I don't think they had cell phones, too many cell phones in the 90s, and I thought, oh no, we're cooked. We just lost them, and we're out on our own, and that was scary.
How did you get back?
I can't remember how we reconnected. Maybe through calls home, and call back to Reading, call back through a phone booth or something. It was so difficult to get all the paperwork together, all the signatures, get permission from this person, get permission from the school board, that we just went anyway. I'd talk to the parents. I'd say, if I have good insurance, I take care of your kids. Out of the classroom was a great way. It's the best way to teach English and American culture. not only did I never have a second thought that I was doing the wrong thing, maybe breaking a few rules, yes, breaking a few rules and defending kids that sometimes didn't deserve my defense. And all you guys that watched me march, hear you tell your less than truthful story to me, and then I head down to the office to defend you, feeling righteous as can be, and all along you were a little guiltier than you were letting on, and you watched me and didn't stop me. You just I'll let him go ahead. Next time you say, wait a minute, Mr. Copland. I did have a kid.
And there was a kid that cut down your trees?
Son.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see him. What?
And you know what? He feels really bad about that.
I heard that. And he doesn't need to feel bad. I had to be a little tougher on him because taking the chainsaw out of my truck was dangerous, to say the least. And I also found out, and I want to know who brought alcohol up there. And I don't know who that was for sure. It was someone that wasn't with the initial group. Someone came up later through cell phone contact. But I was concerned with that, and I chewed him out. But Son was a great kid. You can't, great kid that made a mistake. And, if anything, I'd like to think it brought us closer. I would trust him. I would trust him to do the same. Take kids anywhere. Trust him to do whatever he wants. He was very capable, very practical, very smart, and knew how far to go. So it wasn't as nearly as dangerous as I imagined it to be. But I'm risking my job and my reputation for him to have a thrill with alcohol and chainsaws. Yeah, no, Son and his whole family came through the school system. The sisters, some very pretty sisters, Mei Chim, and then the next one,
Emily and Kelly.
Nye. Was it Nye? He was pretty reckless. But he always was square with me. When I heard complaints, the kids were extra good with me. And when I hear it's like a parent, well, they don't behave that way around me. You know, you always looked after me. Once in a while, I had a kid pull me aside and say, don't go down to the office. They're guilty. You know, they would tell me to don't go there. But they could be hell outside my door, you know. But when Potato one time, he had Mr. Worley, and Mr. Worley was very strict, and I told him, I said, he was smart enough, not to me, but about saying wild things about Mr. Worley, cussing him out maybe. And I said, don't mess with Mr. Worley. I said, he's got every hair in place, and he'll nail you if you do that. And hair in place, meaning he's organized, and he doesn't miss a trick. And so a little while later that day, he came to me, he says, I told Mr. Worley what you said about him. And I said, what did you tell him? He says, I told him that Mr. Copland said you had curly hair. No, straight hair. I told him that Mr. Copland said you had straight hair. And I rolled my eyes. I had to go explain to Worley it's kind of embarrassing. I said, I told him you had every hair in place, not that you had straight hair. I don't know what I'll do now, but I've got opportunities. I'll do some volunteer work. I might work through Seacom a little bit. I love Alice McFadden. She's a director now. She's a Jew. She's an angel, and with a great sense of humor. And I might do some work with them. I'd like to work through McConnell, with McConnell Foundation on some projects. I read Michelle has talked to me about that. I really like that idea. I'd had some ideas. I'd submitted a proposal for McConnell years and years ago. I knew they weren't going to fund it because it was I just didn't have all the knowledge and information they needed. But I still think it's a good idea of building a traditional Mien house. It's a great educational tool. Find a piece of property and maybe even something could be built, constructed, and then deconstructed and constructed again. All the vocabulary that's involved with ceilings and roofs and joists, and then also finding a permanent the Mien history is remarkable because it's of some of the customs that they've retained for hundreds, if not thousands of years, doing the same thing the same way. My own background, heritage, immigrant heritage, every time we move, we change languages, religions, clothes. Nothing, there's not very much consistent. But with the Mien, there's a great deal of consistency. In order to maintain that consistency, you have to be honest with each other. You have to stick together.
Mm-hmm.
You guys were wonderful to me, and I think we all knew that, and we played a team together and made things work, and it's very successful. And what you're doing for me now is really wonderful. The last few years of my career have not been very good, and it really it makes me sentimental, but also that, and I don't care that they're not rich or big career or wealthy. And I know life has been tough on a lot of you guys. You've had your ups and downs, maybe divorces, maybe marriage, kids that didn't work, family and stuff, problems. But the fact that you would come together like this tells me that I at least helped you become mature adults. The fact that you're doing this speaks for your maturity and your integrity. The Mien were always far more integrity than most of the people I dealt with on a regular basis. I know that I only did what was right. I did what I would want some people to do. I did what people did for me when I was young growing up and didn't know the world very well. I know that if I were in the mountains of Laos with my family and didn't speak the language, didn't understand the culture, and I were wandering, lost, I know that the Mien would come to me and ask me, have you eaten yet? Why are you here? You're lost. Let's help you. Let's get your kids. Let's help you build a house. Let's help you learn a new religion, maybe. Let's help you learn the language. And if the police are harassing you, or if you're not understanding the laws, and they would help me. Every one of them would help. None of them would let me flounder or just drift away to the wayside, have to take care of myself without understanding anything until they were sure that I was capable of taking care of myself. And even then, they would stick by me. So it's that aspect of human nature that's just remarkable. The American-Vietnam conflict was a tragedy. Loss, horrible loss, but I'm glad they came to Reading. It helped Reading, it helped me, and I don't think any of you want to go back to the mountains other than to visit. So your kids make Reading your home, and remember what your parents, Mr. Copland, taught you. By role model, not by words or not by anything else, because it pays off. Okay.